The fluorescent lights in the Pacific Northwest Medical Center cast their familiar harsh glow as I sat in the waiting room, clutching my phone with trembling fingers. The text message had arrived just minutes before my scheduled chemotherapy session, and I read it for the third time, hoping the words would somehow rearrange themselves into something less devastating. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Emergency, at work, can't make it today. Take an Uber home. We'll talk later. Derek. 8 months, 8 months of cancer treatment, and my husband had missed exactly 0 appointments until today. The irony wasn't lost on me that he chose to abandon me on what was supposed to be my final chemotherapy session. The day we'd been counting down to for weeks, the day that marked the beginning of my recovery. I looked around the waiting room at other patients, some accompanied by devoted spouses, others with adult children holding their hands, whispering words of encouragement. The elderly man across from me had his wife of 50 years reading him crossword clues to pass the time. Their easy affection made my chest tighten with something that felt dangerously close to envy. Rachel Thompson? The nurse's voice cut through my spiraling thought. Lisa Rodriguez appeared at the doorway, her kind eyes immediately scanning the area around me. Where's Derek today? I forced a smile that felt like broken glass. Work, emergency. You know how it is. But Lisa's expression suggested she knew exactly how it wasn't supposed to be. In the months we'd spent together, she'd watched Derek fuss over me, bring me elaborate lunches, and charm every medical professional with his devoted husband routine. His sudden absence clearly struck her as wrong. The walk to the treatment room felt longer than usual, my footsteps echoing against the polished linoleum. Lisa settled me into the familiar reclining chair, the same spot where I'd spent countless hours over the past 8 months, watching poison drip into my veins to kill the cancer that had invaded my body at 32 years old. How are you feeling about today being your last session? Lisa asked as she prepared the IV line. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her tone carried the warmth that had sustained me through the darkest moments of treatment. Honestly, terrified, I admitted. Not about the chemo ending, but about what comes next. Derek's been so stressed lately, and I keep feeling like he's pulling away from me. Lisa paused in her preparations, glancing toward the doorway before lowering her voice. Has he been helping with your medications at home? Making sure you're taking everything on schedule? The question struck me as odd. Of course, he's been incredible about organizing my pills, setting reminders, even coming to the pharmacy with me to pick up prescriptions. Why do you ask? Something flickered across Lisa's face, too quick for me to interpret. Just want to make sure you have good support at home. Recovery is just as important as treatment. As the chemotherapy began its familiar burn through my veins, I found myself replaying Derek's behavior over the past few weeks. The late nights at the office that had become routine. The way he'd started taking my phone to charge it in the other room during my worst days. His insistence on handling all communication with my medical team, claiming he wanted to protect me from stress. At the time, his attentiveness had seemed like devotion. Now, sitting alone in this sterile room, I wondered if there might be another explanation. Lisa, I called softly as she checked my vitals. Can I ask you something about my treatment schedule? Of course. I've been getting confused about my appointment times lately. Derek always confirms them for me, but twice this month I've shown up and been told I was a day early or late. Is that normal with chemo brain? Lisa's pen stopped moving across my chart. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, then glanced around to ensure we were alone. Rachel, who typically calls to confirm your appointments. Derek does. He has all my medical information in his phone, and he said it was easier for him to handle the scheduling since I've been so tired. I see. Lisa made a note in my chart, but something in her tone had shifted. You know, after today's session, you might want to start taking a more active role in managing your own appointments. Recovery is about reclaiming control over your life. The suggestion felt loaded with meaning I couldn't grasp. Is there something I should know? Lisa sat down in the chair beside me, her expression serious. "Rachel, I want you to promise me something. When you get home today, I want you to call our patient services line and request copies of all your medical records from the past 8 months. Everything. Appointment schedules, prescription records, test results. All of it." "Why would I need all that?" "Because knowledge is power. Especially when you're dealing with a serious illness. You should know exactly what treatments you've received, when you received them, and what your doctors have recommended for your care." The weight of her words settled over me like a lead blanket. "Lisa, are you trying to tell me something?" She reached over and squeezed my hand gently. "I'm telling you to trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And Rachel, don't let anyone, even your husband, control access to your own medical information." The remainder of my chemotherapy session passed in contemplative silence. Lisa's words echoed in my mind, mixing with half-remembered conversations and moments that had seemed insignificant at the time. Derek's insistence on speaking to my doctors privately, his frequent trips to pick up my medications alone, the way he'd dismissed my concerns about feeling sicker than expected during certain treatment cycles. When the final drops of chemotherapy finished their slow journey into my bloodstream, I should have felt celebration. Instead, I felt the growing certainty that something fundamental was wrong with my marriage. Something that went far deeper than the stress of a cancer diagnosis. "All done," Lisa announced, carefully removing the IV line. "How do you feel?" "Free," I said, surprised by the word that emerged. "I feel free," Lisa smiled, but her eyes remained serious. "Remember what we talked about. Knowledge is power." As I gathered my belongings to leave, my phone buzzed with another text from Derek. "Hope everything went well. Working late again tonight. Order yourself some dinner." Standing in the hospital parking lot under the gray Portland sky, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of calling an Uber, I walked back into the medical center and approached the patient services desk. "I'd like to request copies of all my medical records," I told the clerk. "Everything from the past 8 months. The woman behind the desk smiled efficiently. "Of course, we can have those ready for pickup tomorrow afternoon. Or we can mail them to your home address." "I'll pick them up," I said quickly. "And could you make sure they include all prescription records, appointment schedules, and any notes from phone calls to or from my medical team?" "Absolutely. Is there anything specific you're looking for?" I hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I think someone might be interfering with my medical care, and I need to understand exactly what's been happening." The clerk's expression shifted to one of concern. "Mrs. Thompson, if you suspect medical abuse or interference, you should speak with our social worker immediately. Would you like me to page David Chen? He handles these types of situations." Medical abuse. The term hit me like a physical blow. Until that moment, I hadn't put a name to my growing suspicions, but hearing it spoken aloud crystallized everything. "Yes, I think I would like to speak with him." David Chen arrived within minutes. A soft-spoken man in his 40s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He led me to a quiet office away from the main hospital traffic. "Tell me what's been concerning you," he said, settling into his chair with the patient attention of someone who'd heard difficult stories before. I found myself pouring out months of half-formed worries. Derek's control over my medical appointment, the confusion about scheduling that had led to missed treatments, his insistence on handling all my medications, the way he'd grown increasingly distant as my treatment progressed, even as he maintained his public image as the devoted husband. "Rachel," David said when I finished, "what you're describing could constitute medical abuse, which is a form of domestic violence. Someone interfering with a patient's medical care, whether through sabotage, control, or neglect, is committing a serious crime." The words sent a chill through me. But Derek's been so attentive. He comes to most of my appointments. He organizes my medications. He talks to my doctors. Control often masquerades as care, David explained gently. "The question is whether his involvement has been helping or hindering your treatment. The medical records will help us understand that." David provided me with information about domestic violence resources and safety planning, concepts I'd never imagined would apply to my marriage. As he spoke, pieces of a puzzle I hadn't realized I was solving began falling into place. Derek's work emergencies that coincided with important medical appointments. His anger when I'd suggested asking my oncologist about certain symptoms I'd been experiencing. The way he'd discouraged me from joining cancer support groups or maintaining close friendships during treatment. His insistence that I was too sick to handle certain responsibilities, while simultaneously complaining about the burden my illness placed on him. "I need to ask you a difficult question," David said. "Do you feel safe going home tonight?" The question hung in the air between us. Did I feel safe? For months I'd attributed Derek's behavior to stress, to the difficulty of watching a spouse battle cancer, but sitting in this quiet office, speaking these concerns aloud for the first time, I realized that safety wasn't something I'd felt in a very long time. "I don't know," I admitted. "I honestly don't know anymore." David provided me with the contact information for a domestic violence hotline and the address of a local women's shelter. "These are just precautions," he assured me, "but knowledge is power, and you should know what resources are available to you." As I finally left the medical center, my phone rang. Derek's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time in our 5-year marriage, I hesitated before answering. "Hey babe." His voice carried its usual warmth. "How did everything go today? I'm so sorry I couldn't be there for your big day." "It went fine," I said carefully. "The nurses took good care of me." "That's great. Listen, I'm going to be really late tonight. This project is killing me. Don't wait up. Okay, Derek? Where are you exactly?" "What project?" A pause. "What do you mean?" "I'm at the office, working on the Peterson account. You know how demanding clients can be." But something in his tone felt rehearsed, artificial. "Which office? Downtown? Or the Hillsdale location?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Downtown, of course." "Why are you asking so many questions? You sound different." "I'm just tired. It's been a long day." "Well, get some rest. Tomorrow we can celebrate you finishing chemo. I'll bring home champagne." After ending the call, I sat in my car for a long time, watching other cancer patients emerge from the medical center with their support systems. Some looked exhausted, others relieved, but all of them had someone by their side. I thought about Derek's promise to bring home champagne, about celebrating the end of my treatment, but instead of anticipation, I felt something that surprised me, dread. The idea of celebrating with Derek, of pretending everything was normal between us, felt impossible now that my suspicions had been given voice. As I drove home through the early evening traffic, I made mental notes of things I'd previously overlooked. Derek's recent interest in our insurance policies, his suggestion that I update my will just to be safe during treatment, the way he'd started handling all our financial correspondence, claiming he wanted to protect me from stress. Our apartment in Cedar Ridge felt different when I walked through the door. The space that had been my refuge during the worst days of chemotherapy now felt like a stage set, carefully arranged to support a performance I was only beginning to understand. Derek's laptop sat open on the kitchen counter, something that had never bothered me before. Now I found myself wondering what secrets it might hold. His phone, which he'd begun guarding more carefully in recent weeks, was nowhere to be seen. I opened our medicine cabinet and really looked at my medications for the first time in months. Derek had organized everything so efficiently, with pill organizers marked for each day of the week, but as I examined the containers more closely, I noticed something strange. The quantities didn't match what I remembered receiving from the pharmacy. My anti-nausea medication, which should have been sufficient for a full month based on my prescription, was nearly empty after only 2 weeks. The pain medication I'd been prescribed for the bone aches that accompanied chemotherapy was similarly depleted. Either I'd been taking more than prescribed, or someone else had been accessing my medication. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Derek had been handling my medications, organizing them, reminding me when to take them. If someone was interfering with my prescriptions, He was the only person with consistent access. I sank onto our couch, the same place where Derek had held me during my worst days of treatment, whispering reassurances about our future together, the same place where he'd convinced me to let him handle the practical aspects of my care, so I could focus on healing. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Maria Santos. "How did your last chemo session go? Are you celebrating tonight?" Instead of the triumphant message I'd planned to send, I found myself typing, "It went okay, Derek. Couldn't make it. Can we talk tomorrow?" Maria's response was immediate. "Of course, are you okay? You sound off." I stared at her question, realizing I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt okay. For months, I'd attributed every strange symptom, every setback, every moment of confusion to the cancer and its treatment. But what if some of my suffering had been intentionally caused? The thought was so devastating that I couldn't sit still. I began moving through our apartment, really seeing it for the first time in months. Derek's recent purchases that he'd claimed were investments in our future, the expensive watch he'd bought himself to celebrate my progress, the vacation he'd planned for himself with colleagues, scheduled for just 2 weeks after my treatment ended. In our bedroom, I opened Derek's dresser drawer, looking for nothing and everything. Hidden beneath his t-shirts, I found a folder containing documents I didn't recognize, insurance papers with highlighted sections, medical forms with forged signatures that looked like mine but weren't quite right, and most damning of all, printouts of emails between Derek and someone named Stephanie Clark, discussing timing and financial arrangements. And after she's gone, the folder slipped from my numb fingers, papers scattering across our bedroom floor. Derek hadn't just been interfering with my medical care, he'd been planning for my death, making arrangements for a future that didn't include me. I gathered the papers with shaking hands, photographing each page with my phone before carefully returning them to their hiding place. The evidence of Derek's betrayal felt surreal, like something from a movie rather than my actual life. As darkness fell outside our apartment windows, I realized I was no longer the naive cancer patient who'd trusted her husband to handle her care. I was a woman who'd been systematically betrayed, manipulated, and possibly poisoned by the person who'd promised to love and protect her. But I was also a woman who'd survived 8 months of chemotherapy, who'd fought cancer and won. If I could beat cancer, I could certainly beat Derek at his own game. Sitting at our kitchen table, I began making a list of everything I needed to do: medical records to collect, people to contact, evidence to gather. I would approach this betrayal the same way I'd approached my cancer treatment, methodically, strategically, and with the determination to survive. Derek thought he was married to a weak, dying woman who depended on him for everything. Tomorrow he would begin to discover exactly how wrong he was. The woman who'd walked into chemotherapy that morning had been a victim. The woman planning his downfall was a survivor, and survivors, as I was about to prove, were far more dangerous than Derek could have imagined. The next morning brought a clarity I hadn't experienced in months. Derek had left early for another mysterious work obligation, kissing my forehead with the same tender gesture that had once comforted me, and now felt like mockery. I waited until his car disappeared around the corner before beginning what would become the most important investigation of my life. My first call was to Pacific Northwest Medical Center's Patient Services Department. The woman who answered, Janet, had a warm voice that immediately put me at ease. When I explained I needed to collect my medical records, "Mrs. Thompson, we have everything ready for you. Dr. Morrison also asked me to let you know she'd like to speak with you when you come in, if you have time." Dr. Catherine Morrison, wanting to see me, felt significant, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Throughout my treatment, she'd been professional but distant, always directing most of her comments to Derek rather than me. I'd attributed this to his assertive personality, and assumed she was simply accommodating his need to be involved. "Tell Dr. Morrison I'll be there within the hour," I said. Before leaving for the hospital, I called Maria Santos. We'd been friends since college, and her career as a paralegal meant she understood the importance of documentation better than most. "Rachel, you sound different today," Maria observed immediately. Is everything okay? Actually, no. I think Derek has been sabotaging my cancer treatment, and I need help figuring out how to prove it. The silence that followed stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Maria spoke, her voice carefully controlled. Where are you right now? Are you safe? I'm at home, but Derek's at work. Maria, I found documents in his dresser, insurance papers, forged signatures, emails about financial arrangements, and someone named Stephanie Clark. Stephanie Clark, Maria repeated slowly. Rachel, do you remember Derek's company Christmas party last year? The one you missed because of chemo? A chill ran down my spine. Vaguely, Derek said it wasn't important, that I shouldn't worry about missing it. There was a woman there, blonde, maybe late 20s, works in Derek's department. She was very interested in asking about you, about your prognosis, about how Derek was handling everything. At the time I thought she was just being friendly, but looking back, what was her name? Stephanie I remember thinking it was weird how she kept steering the conversation back to your illness, and how hard it must be for Derek. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Maria, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Have you noticed changes in Derek's behavior toward me over the past few months? Another pause. You really want to know? I need to know. He's been controlling, Rachel, more than I realized at first. The way he speaks for you, makes decisions about your social life, isolates you from friends and family. I thought it was just stress from your illness, but now that you're asking, Maria's voice trailed off. What? There have been times when I've called and Derek said you were too sick to talk, but then I'd see you post something on social media that suggested you were feeling fine, or he'd cancel plans we'd made, saying you were having a bad day, but you'd never mentioned feeling unwell when we'd spoken directly. I felt like I was seeing my life from the outside for the first time. Why didn't you say anything? Because questioning someone's caregiver during cancer treatment feels horrible, even when something seems off. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that Derek was just being protective. After hanging up with Maria, I sat in my car outside the medical center, gathering courage for what I was about to discover. The manila envelope containing my medical records felt heavier than it should have, weighted with the potential to confirm my worst fears. Dr. Morrison was waiting for me in her office, and for the first time since my diagnosis, she looked directly at me, instead of scanning the room for Derek. Rachel, please sit down. I'm glad you decided to collect your records. There are some things we need to discuss. She opened a thick file on her desk, and I could see pages of handwritten notes, lab results, and appointment summaries. I want to start by asking you about your medication compliance. Have you been taking your prescriptions exactly as directed? I thought I would. Derek organizes all my medications and reminds me when to take them. He said it was important to stay on schedule. Dr. Morrison nodded slowly. And who typically picks up your prescriptions from the pharmacy? Derek does. He said it was easier since he passes Westside Pharmacy on his way home from work. I see. Dr. Morrison made a note. Rachel, I need to share something with you that's been concerning our medical team. Over the past 4 months, there have been several instances where your symptoms and test results didn't align with what we would expect from your treatment protocol. She pulled out a series of lab reports, spreading them across her desk. These are your blood counts from your chemotherapy sessions. Notice anything unusual? I studied the numbers, but they meant nothing to me. I'm sorry, I don't understand what I'm looking at. Your white blood cell counts have been inconsistent in a way that suggests your anti-nausea and supportive medications haven't been working as effectively as they should. Initially, we attributed this to individual variation in drug metabolism, but when we compare your in-hospital responses to your at-home recovery patterns, there's a significant discrepancy. Dr. Morrison leaned forward, her expression serious. Rachel, when you're here receiving chemotherapy, your body responds exactly as we'd expect. Your side effects are manageable, your blood work stabilizes, and you seem to tolerate treatment well, but based on your reports of symptoms at home, and the emergency visits you've had, it's as if you're experiencing a completely different treatment regimen. What does that mean?
It could mean several things, but combined with some other irregularities we've noticed, I'm concerned that someone may be interfering with your home medications. The room felt like it was spinning. What kind of irregularities? Dr. Morrison hesitated before continuing. Phone calls canceling, or rescheduling your appointments, supposedly from you, but the person calling didn't have accurate information about your treatment schedule, prescription refill requests that didn't match your actual usage pattern, and most concerning, someone called our office 3 weeks ago asking about your prognosis and whether your condition was terminal. Who called? The person identified themselves as your husband, but when we asked security questions about your treatment history, they couldn't provide correct answers. We documented the incident, but assumed it was a miscommunication. I felt sick, and for once, it had nothing to do with chemotherapy. Dr. Morrison, is there any way to prove if someone has been tampering with my medications? Actually, yes. We can run some tests that will show what medications are currently in your system, and we can compare that to what you should have taken based on your prescribed regimen. We can also review pharmacy records to see if there are discrepancies between what was dispensed and what you reportedly consumed. She reached across her desk and handed me a business card. I'm also going to recommend that you speak with Detective Patricia Williams. She specializes in domestic violence cases that involve medical abuse. Medical abuse. There was that term again, and hearing it from my oncologist made it impossible to deny. Dr. Morrison, I have to ask.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. If someone has been interfering with my medications, could it have affected my treatment outcomes? Her expression grew grave. Rachel, you've responded remarkably well to treatment despite the inconsistencies we've observed. Your cancer is in remission, and your prognosis is excellent. But if someone has been sabotaging your supportive care medications, they've made your journey much more difficult than it needed to be. Could it have been life-threatening? Potentially, yes. Proper supportive care during chemotherapy isn't just about comfort. It's about preventing complications that could require hospitalization or force us to reduce treatment doses. If someone deliberately interfered with those medications, she didn't need to finish the sentence. I understood the implications. After leaving Doc Morrison's office, I sat in the hospital parking lot and called Detective Patricia Williams. Her voice was crisp and professional when she answered, but it warmed when I explained why Dr. Morrison had referred me. Miss Thompson, medical abuse in domestic relationships is more common than people realize, and it's extremely serious. Can you meet me at the police station this afternoon? I'd like to take a formal statement and discuss how we can gather evidence safely. What kind of evidence would you need? Medical records, which you're already collecting. Pharmacy records, which we can subpoena. Any documentation of the suspicious phone calls to your medical team, and if possible, samples of your current medications for laboratory analysis. The idea of having my medications tested sent a chill through me. Detective Williams, if Derek has been tampering with my pills, would that show up in testing? Absolute. Whether someone is diluting medications, substituting placebos, or adding harmful substances, forensic analysis can detect it. We work with a lab that specializes in these cases. After scheduling an appointment with Detective Williams for the following day, I drove to Westside Pharmacy to begin gathering evidence there. The pharmacist, an older man named Robert Kim, recognized me immediately. Mrs. Thompson, congratulations on finishing your chemotherapy. Your husband mentioned yesterday that you'd completed treatment. Derek was here yesterday. Yes, picking up your final prescription refills. He seemed very relieved that this chapter was behind you both. I felt a surge of anger. Derek had been at the pharmacy, dealing with my medications, while claiming he was too busy with work to attend my final chemotherapy session. Mr. Kim, I need to ask you something confidential. Over the past 8 months, have you noticed anything unusual about my prescription pattern? Robert's expression grew concerned. What kind of unusual? Refill requests that seemed too frequent, or questions about my medications that seemed strange. He was quiet for a long moment, then gestured for me to follow him to a private consultation area behind the pharmacy counter. Mrs. Thompson, I probably should have said something earlier, but your husband has been asking a lot of questions about drug interactions and side effects that seemed unusual for a caregiver. What kind of things, like what would happen if someone took double doses of certain medications, or how long various drugs would stay in someone's system. He also asked about getting extra quantities of your anti-nausea medication, claiming you were using more than prescribed. My hands began to shake. Did you give him extra medication? No, I told him that any changes to your prescriptions would need to come directly from Dr. Morrison's office. But Mrs. Thompson, there's something else. Robert pulled up records on his computer screen. Your prescription refill pattern has been inconsistent with what I'd expect for someone taking medications as prescribed. Some drugs you've been refilling too frequently, others not frequently enough. He showed me the computer records, pointing to dates and quantities that painted a disturbing picture. If you've been taking your medications exactly as prescribed, these numbers don't make sense. Is there any way to know what happened to the extra medication? Not definitively, but I can provide you with complete records of everything that's been dispensed in your name. You'll need these if you're planning to file a report. As Robert printed out months of prescription records, I felt the weight of evidence accumulate. Each document, each inconsistency, each professional concern was building toward an undeniable conclusion. Derek had been systematically sabotaging my cancer treatment. The drive home felt like moving through a dream. I kept expecting to wake up and discover that this was all some chemotherapy-induced nightmare. But the manila folders on my passenger seat, filled with medical records and pharmacy documents, were undeniably real. Derek's car was in our parking space when I arrived home, which surprised me since he'd claimed he would be working late again. I sat in my car for several minutes, gathering courage for a confrontation I wasn't ready to have. When I walked into our apartment, Derek was sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open and papers spread around him. He looked up with the smile that had once made my heart race and now made my stomach turn. Hey babe, you're home earlier than I expected. How was your day? The casual tone of his question, as if this were any normal day in our marriage, struck me as grotesque given what I'd learned. I went to the medical center to pick up my records, I said carefully, watching his reaction. Something flickered across Derek's face, gone so quickly I almost missed it. That's great. Did Dr. Morrison have good things to say about your recovery? She had some interesting observations about my treatment experience. Derek's fingers paused over his keyboard. Oh? Like what? I decided to test him with something specific. She mentioned that someone had called the office asking about my prognosis. Someone claiming to be my husband but who couldn't answer basic questions about my treatment. Derek's face went completely blank, and for a moment, I saw him calculating his response. That's strange. I wonder who would do something like that. I wondered the same thing. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken accusation. Derek closed his laptop and gathered his papers, moving with deliberate casualness. I should let you rest. You've had a big day, and I know finishing chemo has been emotional. Where are you going? Just putting these work documents away. Then I thought we could order dinner and relax. But as Derek walked toward our bedroom, I noticed one of his papers had fallen to the floor. I picked it up quickly, and my blood turned to ice. It was a life insurance policy document with my name on it, and someone had calculated potential payout amounts in the margin. Derek returned to the kitchen before I could fully process what I was holding. When he saw the paper in my hands, his carefully maintained composure finally cracked. Rachel, that's not what it looks like. Then what is it? It's just financial planning, making sure we're prepared for anything. All married couples should have life insurance. This policy is for $500,000, Derek. We never discussed life insurance. I wanted to surprise you. I thought it would give you peace of mind during treatment, but the explanation felt hollow, especially given everything else I'd discovered. When did you take out this policy? Derek's hesitation told me everything I needed to know. A few months ago, right after your diagnosis. You took out a massive life insurance policy on your cancer patient wife without telling her. I was trying to protect us financially. The volume of his response revealed his desperation, and I realized I was no longer looking at the caring husband I'd thought I married. I was looking at a stranger who had been planning for my death while pretending to support my recovery. "I think I need some air," I said, moving toward the door. "Rachel, wait. Let's talk about this rational." But I was already grabbing my keys and purse, driven by an instinct that told me I needed to leave immediately. As I reached the door, Derek's voice stopped me. "Where are you going?" The question carried an undertone that raised every alarm bell in my mind. For the first time in our marriage, Derek's voice held a threat. "To see Maria," I said without turning around. "Don't do anything stupid, Rachel. You're still recovering from chemotherapy. You're not thinking clearly." I turned to face him then, and saw something in his expression I'd never noticed before, something cold and calculating, that made me wonder how long he'd been wearing a mask in our marriage. "My thinking has never been clearer," I said, and walked out the door. As I drove toward Maria's house, my phone buzzed continuously with texts from Derek. Apologies, explanations, promises to discuss everything when I came home, but mixed in with his pleading messages were others that felt more ominous. "Don't make this harder than it needs to. You're not well enough to be making major decisions. I've sacrificed everything for your treatment." Each message revealed more of Derek's true nature, the manipulative controller who had been hidden beneath the devoted husband facade. By the time I reached Maria's house, I was shaking with a combination of fear and rage. Maria took one look at my face and pulled me inside without question. Over coffee in the safety of her living room, I spread out all the evidence I'd gathered: medical records, pharmacy documents, insurance papers, and screenshots of Derek's increasingly threatening text messages. "Rachel," Maria said after reviewing everything, "this isn't just medical abuse. This looks like attempted murder disguised as caregiving." The words hung between us like a physical presence. Attempted murder. The idea that Derek had been slowly poisoning me while pretending to care for me was so monstrous it seemed impossible, but the evidence was undeniable. Derek had been systematically undermining my medical care, interfering with my medications, and planning for a financial windfall from my death. The loving husband routine had been nothing more than an elaborate performance. "What do I do now?" I asked Maria. "Now we make sure he faces the consequences of what he's done, but first we make sure you're safe." Maria helped me gather all the evidence into organized files, photographing everything, and creating backup copies. She also helped me draft a timeline of Derek's suspicious behaviors, documenting every incident I could remember. As evening fell, my phone continued buzzing with messages from Derek, each one more desperate than the last. But I no longer felt any obligation to respond to the man who had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. Instead, I focused on tomorrow's meeting with Detective Patricia Williams, and the beginning of Derek's reckoning. He thought he had been married to a weak, naive woman who would never question his authority. Tomorrow he would discover exactly how wrong he had been. The woman who had trusted him blindly was gone, replaced by someone who understood that survival sometimes required fighting back against the people who claimed to love you most. Detective Patricia Williams possessed the kind of steady presence that immediately inspired confidence. Her office at the Portland Police Bureau was functional rather than welcoming, but her direct gaze and careful attention to detail made it clear that she took domestic violence cases seriously. "Mrs. Thompson, before we begin recording your statement, I want you to understand that what you're describing constitutes several serious felonies. Medical abuse, insurance fraud, attempted poisoning, and conspiracy are all charges we could potentially pursue based on what you've told me." I sat across from her desk, surrounded by the evidence I'd spent the past day collecting: medical records, pharmacy printouts, insurance documents, and screenshots of Derek's threatening text messages were organized in neat piles between us. "I still can't quite believe this is real," I admitted. 6 months ago, I thought I had the most supportive husband in the world." Detective Williams nodded with the understanding of someone who'd heard similar stories before. "Abusers often escalate their behavior during times when their victims are most vulnerable. A cancer diagnosis creates the perfect opportunity for someone to exert control while appearing to provide care." She activated a digital recorder and began taking my formal statement, starting with my cancer diagnosis and working chronologically through Derek's increasing control over my medical care. As I spoke,
Detective Williams took detailed notes, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. Tell me about the first time you noticed Derek taking control of your medical appointments, she prompted. It was subtle at first. He offered to handle the scheduling because I was overwhelmed by the diagnosis. He said he wanted to protect me from stress, so he started being the primary contact with my medical team. And when did this support begin to feel like control? I thought carefully before answering. When I started noticing discrepancies between what Derek told me about my appointments and what actually happened. Times when I'd show up and the staff would seem confused about my schedule, or when Derek would cancel appointments without telling me first. Detective Williams made notes about each incident I described, creating a timeline that revealed the systematic nature of Derek's interference. She was particularly interested in the medication tampering, asking detailed questions about how Derek had organized my pills and managed my prescriptions. Mrs. Thompson, I'm going to recommend that we have your current medications tested by our forensic laboratory. We'll also need to coordinate with your oncologist to run blood tests that can detect whether you've been receiving the correct dosages of your prescribed drugs. The idea of scientific proof felt both terrifying and validating. How long would those tests take? The blood work can be done immediately, and we'll have results within 48 hours. The medication analysis will take longer, perhaps a week. But Mrs. Thompson, there's something else we need to discuss. Detective Williams leaned forward, her expression serious. Based on what you've told me, I'm concerned about your immediate safety. Your husband has been systematically undermining your medical care, and now that you're questioning him, he may escalate his behavior. Derek has never been physically violent, I said, though even as I spoke I remembered the threatening undertone in his voice when I'd left the apartment. Medical abuse is violence, Detective Williams corrected gently. Someone who would poison their spouse's medications or interfere with cancer treatment has already demonstrated they're willing to cause serious harm. We need to assume he's dangerous. She provided me with information about protective orders and safe housing options, but I struggled to imagine Derek as the kind of person who would require legal restraints. Despite everything I'd discovered, part of me still saw him as the charming man I'd married. Detective Williams, what happens next? Do you arrest him immediately? We need to build a solid case first. Medical abuse cases require extensive documentation because the charges are serious and the defenses can be complex. We'll coordinate with the district attorney's office, gather all the medical evidence, and interview witnesses before making an arrest. How long will that take? A few days to a week, depending on how quickly we can get test results and witness statements. In the meantime, I strongly recommend that you don't return home alone, and that you document any contact Derek has with you. After finishing my statement, Detective Williams walked me to the medical examiner's office in the same building, where a technician drew blood samples for the toxicology analysis. The process felt surreal, like something from a television crime drama rather than my actual life. These tests will show us exactly what medications are in your system, and at what concentrations, the technician explained. If someone has been tampering with your prescriptions, we'll be able to prove it definitively. From the police station, I drove directly to Dr. Morrison's office, where she was waiting with additional medical evidence that could support the criminal case. Rachel, I've been reviewing your complete treatment file, and I want to show you something that concerns me greatly. Dr. Morrison pulled up a series of computer screens, showing my treatment response data over the past 8 months. These graphs show your white blood cell counts, nausea levels, and general symptom reports throughout your chemotherapy. She pointed to several dramatic spikes in the data. See these periods where your symptoms suddenly worsened and your blood work became unstable. They don't correspond to treatment intensification, or any medical reason for increased side effects. What do they correspond? I cross-referenced the dates with your appointment schedule and prescription refills. Every major symptom spike occurred within days of Derek picking up new medications for you. The pattern was undeniable when displayed visually. My worst periods of illness had coincided perfectly with Derek's management of my medications. Dr. Morrison, could this pattern of medication tampering have killed me? Her expression grew grave. Rachel, proper supportive care during chemotherapy isn't optional. Anti-nausea medications prevent dehydration that can lead to kidney failure. Pain medications allow patients to maintain nutrition and mobility. If someone systematically undermined those supports, it could have been fatal. At minimum, it significantly increased your risk of serious complications. You're fortunate to have responded as well as you did to treatment despite these interferences. Dr. Morrison provided me with copies of all my medical charts, including the computer-generated graphs that showed the correlation between Derek's medication management and my symptom spikes. She also wrote a detailed letter summarizing her medical observations for Detective Williams. "There's one more thing," Dr. Morrison said as I prepared to leave. "I want you to know that the nursing staff noticed changes in Derek's behavior over the course of your treatment."
What kind of changes?
Initially, he was attentive and supportive during your appointment, but as your treatment progressed and your prognosis improved, he seemed increasingly frustrated. Lisa Rodriguez documented several incidents where Derek appeared disappointed when we delivered good news about your recovery. The observation hit me like a physical blow. Derek had been hoping for bad news about my cancer treatment. While I was fighting for my life, he was waiting for me to lose the battle. After leaving Dr. Morrison's office, I called Maria to update her on my meetings with Detective Williams and my oncologist. She listened with growing outrage as I described the evidence against Derek. "Rachel, you need to stay with me until this is resolved. I don't want you going back to that apartment. I have to get some clothes and personal items. I can't live in the same outfit forever. Then we'll go together, and we'll call the police to escort us. You're not facing Derek alone." That afternoon, Detective Williams arranged for a uniformed officer to accompany Maria and me to my apartment. Officer Jennifer Park was a calm, professional woman who treated the situation with appropriate seriousness. "Mrs. Thompson, we'll go in first to make sure your husband isn't there, then escort you while you gather what you need. Try to be quick and stick to essential." Derek's car wasn't in the parking lot, but Officer Park still insisted on checking the apartment before allowing us inside. The space felt foreign now, like a crime scene rather than my home. Everything looked the same, but my understanding of what had happened within these walls had changed completely. As I packed clothes and toiletries, I noticed that Derek had been searching through my belongings. Drawers that I'd left organized were disheveled, and several items were missing from my desk. "He's been looking for something," I told Officer Park. "What kinds of things are missing?" "My appointment cards from the medical center, some financial documents, and my backup phone charge." Officer Park made notes about the evidence of Derek's search. "He's probably trying to destroy anything that could implicate him or track what you've been doing." In our bedroom, I discovered that Derek had removed the insurance documents I'd found in his dress. The hiding place was empty except for a note written in Derek's handwriting. "We need to talk. This has gone too far." The threatening tone of the note sent chills down my spine. Officer Park photographed it immediately and added it to her report. "Mrs. Thompson, this note suggests your husband knows you've discovered his activities and feels threatened by your actions. You need to take your safety very seriously." As we prepared to leave, my phone rang with Derek's number. Officer Park gestured for me to answer while she listened on speaker. "Rachel, where are you? I came home and found the apartment torn apart." "I wasn't there, Derek. If someone searched the apartment, it wasn't me." "Don't lie to me. I know you've been here." "What were you looking for?" The accusatory tone in Derek's voice confirmed that he was becoming desperate and potentially dangerous. "I came to get some clothes. I'm staying with Maria for a while." "This is ridiculous, Rachel. Come home so we can discuss this like adults." "You're being manipulated by people who don't understand our situation." Officer Park shook her head, silently advising me not to reveal my location or plans. "I think we both need some space right now," I said carefully. "Space?" Derek's voice rose in anger. "I've devoted the last 8 months of my life to caring for you, and this is how you repay me, by running away and spreading lies about me." "I haven't spread any lies, Derek." "Then why did the police call my office asking questions about my whereabouts? What did you tell them?" The fact that Derek already knew about the police investigation revealed how quickly he was monitoring the situation. Officer Park gestured for me to end the call. "I need to go, Derek. We can talk later." "Rachel, I'm warning you, don't do anything you'll regret. You need me more than you realize." The threat was unmistakable, and Officer Park immediately called Detective Williams to report Derek's escalating behavior. That evening, safe in Maria's guest room, I tried to process the surreal turn my life had taken. 3 days earlier, I'd been celebrating the end of chemotherapy with optimism about my future. Now I was hiding from my husband while police investigated him for attempted murder. Maria knocked softly on the bedroom door and entered with a cup of tea and a concerned expression. "How are you holding up? I keep thinking about all the signs I missed," I admitted. Derek's insistence on controlling my medical care, his strange questions about my prognosis, the way he seemed disappointed when I had good days during treatment. "You were fighting cancer, Rach. You were focused on survival, not analyzing your husband's motives. That's completely normal, but I feel so stupid for trusting him completely. He was poisoning me, while I thanked him for taking care of me." Maria sat on the edge of the bed, her expression "Derek is a predator who targeted you when you were most vulnerable. His behavior is not a reflection of your judgment or intelligence." My phone buzzed with another text from Derek. "I know where you are. We need to talk tonight." The message sent ice through my veins. If Derek knew I was at Maria's house, nowhere felt safe anymore. I immediately called Detective Williams, who answered despite the late hour. "Mrs. Thompson, I want you to forward me that text message immediately. We're going to expedite this investigation, based on his escalating threat." Detective Williams: "I'm scared. If Derek is willing to poison me over months, what might he do if he feels cornered? That's why we're going to arrest him tomorrow morning. I've been coordinating with the district attorney's office, and we have enough evidence to file charges." The blood tests came back this afternoon and confirmed that you have subtherapeutic levels of several medications in your system, consistent with diluted or substituted drugs. The confirmation that Derek had indeed been tampering with my medications felt like a punch to the stomach. Despite all the evidence I'd gathered, part of me had hoped for an innocent explanation. What charges will he face? Domestic violence, criminal endangerment, insurance fraud, and attempted poisoning for starter. Depending on what the laboratory analysis of your medications reveals, we may add additional charges. Will he be able to get bail? Given the seriousness of the charges and his threats toward you, we'll request that he be held without bail, as a flight risk and a danger to the victim. After ending the call with Detective Williams, I forwarded Derek's threatening text and tried to sleep despite my racing thoughts. Tomorrow would bring Derek's arrest and the beginning of public exposure of his crime. But first I had to survive the night, knowing that somewhere in Portland, Derek was planning his next move against the wife he'd tried to kill. Around midnight, Maria's security system chimed, indicating motion in her drive. We both froze, listening for sounds that might indicate Derek had found us. Maria grabbed her phone to call 911 while I peered through the bedroom curtains. A car was parked across the street with its lights off, positioned to watch the house. In the darkness, I couldn't see the driver, but the vehicle matched Derek's sedan. "He's here," I whispered to Maria, who was already speaking to the emergency dispatcher. The police arrived within minutes, but by then the mysterious car had disappeared.
But also determined to make sure he couldn't hurt anyone else the way he'd hurt me. Mitchell's cross-examination was aggressive, as D.A. Chen had warned me it would be. She questioned my memory of events during chemotherapy, suggested that my emotional state had colored my interpretation of Derek's actions, and tried to portray me as an unstable woman seeking revenge against a devoted husband. "Miss Thompson, isn't it true that chemotherapy can affect cognitive function and memory?" "Yes, but my memory of Derek's controlling behavior is very clear. Isn't it possible that you misinterpreted your husband's care as something sinister because you were frightened and vulnerable?" "No, the medical evidence proves that my medications were tampered with, and only Derek had consistent access to them." Mitchell tried to suggest that I had tampered with my own medications, either consciously or unconsciously, to create evidence against Derek. The suggestion was so absurd that I could see several jury members shaking their heads in disbelief. The trial's most dramatic moment came when Stephanie Clark testified against Derek. Despite her plea agreement, she faced potential perjury charges if she lied on the stand, giving her testimony credibility. Stephanie described Derek's predatory pattern of targeting vulnerable women, his detailed planning for my death, and their discussions about dividing the insurance money after I died. "Miss Clark, DHN asked. Did Mr. Thompson ever express love or concern for his wife's well-being? No. Derek talked about Rachel like she was an obstacle to overcome, rather than a person he cared about. He was frustrated that her treatment was going well, and that she was recovering faster than he'd expected. Did he ever discuss ways to accelerate her decline? Yeah. Derek researched drug interactions that could cause dangerous side effects, and he asked me to help him find ways to make her sicker without being detected. Under cross-examination, Mitchell attacked Stephanie's credibility by emphasizing her plea agreement and suggesting that she was lying to reduce her own sentence. But Stephanie's testimony was corroborated by the emails and financial records, making her account difficult to dismiss. Derek's decision to testify in his own defense proved to be a fatal mistake. Under DHN's cross-examination, his carefully constructed explanations for his behavior began to crumble. Miss Thompson, DHN asked, why did you take out multiple life insurance policies on your wife without telling her? I wanted to protect our financial future in case something happened to her. But you were facing bankruptcy due to debts she didn't know about. Weren't you? I was managing some financial challenges, but that doesn't mean I wanted my wife to die. Mr. Thompson, if you were truly concerned about your wife's well-being, why did you ask medical staff detailed questions about how missed medications could cause life-threatening complications? Derek's answer was rambling and unconvincing, and his demeanor on the stand revealed the calculating personality that had been hidden beneath his devoted husband facade. The prosecution's closing argument tied together all the evidence into a compelling narrative of premeditated attempted murder disguised as caregiving. Derek Thompson saw his wife's cancer not as a battle they would fight together, but as an opportunity to commit the perfect crime, DHN told the jury. He systematically poisoned her, undermined her treatment, and planned to collect millions of dollars from her death while presenting himself as a grieving widower. Mitchell's closing argument focused on reasonable doubt, suggesting that the prosecution had taken ambiguous evidence and constructed a conspiracy theory around it. The prosecution wants you to believe that every action Derek Thompson took as a caregiver was part of an elaborate murder plot, Mitchell argued. But caring for someone with cancer is complicated and stressful. Mistakes happen, miscommunications occur. That doesn't make someone a criminal. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning with their verdict. As the foreman announced guilty on all counts, I felt a profound sense of vindication and relief. Derek's face remained impassive as the verdict was read, but I could see the calculation in his eyes as he processed the reality of spending decades in prison. Judge Foster sentenced Derek to 25 years to life in prison, with the possibility of parole only after serving the full 25 years. Stephanie Clark received a 5-year sentence in exchange for her cooperation. Standing outside the courthouse after the sentencing, I realized that Derek's trial had given me something beyond justice. It had provided public validation of my experience and ensured that other potential victims might recognize the warning signs of medical abuse. Morrison approached me as I prepared to leave the courthouse. Rachel, I want you to know that your courage in pursuing this case has led to new protocols at medical centers across the country. Your experience is helping protect other vulnerable patients. 6 months later, I testified before a congressional committee about medical abuse in domestic relationships, helping to pass legislation that requires better oversight of caregivers in medical settings. The woman Derek had tried to destroy had become an advocate for other victims. As I rebuilt my life in a new apartment across town from the place where Derek had tried to kill me, I often thought about the strength I'd discovered within myself. Cancer had taught me that I was stronger than I knew, but Derek's betrayal had taught me that strength sometimes means fighting back against the people who claim to love you most. Derek had spent months believing he was married to a helpless victim who would never discover his betrayal. Instead, he'd discovered that the woman he'd tried to murder was far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. The survivor he'd underestimated had become the witness who ensured he could never hurt anyone else again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.